Good afternoon, JMU fans, and welcome to another edition of Sports Talk with Rags here in season 3, episode 79. And today, here we are honored to have Curt Dudley with us today, who's been associated with JMU athletics and also Valley League baseball. And Curt, how you doing today?
Doing very well. Doing very and a beautiful fall day up here in the Shenandoah Valley. So, been out a little bit today. Hopefully, get out a little bit more today. But working in, it's great to be with you here this afternoon.
Well, thanks. And I told my wife just a few minutes ago. It's kind of crazy here. The weather all over the state of Virginia on the last Wednesday here in October. It's kind of crazy weather here with Halloween and the 1st of November right around the corner.
Yeah, we're expecting. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the Old Dominion JMU game, but it's supposed to be 83 degrees here on Saturday.
Wow.
Yeah. But I think by the time we get to game time, of course, which is an 8 o'clock kickoff, it'll feel more like fall in football, I think, by that time. But yeah, so if you're coming up, be prepared that you'll have short sleeves early, but make sure that you bring stuff to bundle up as well.
Right. Well, hey, let's start at the beginning. What grabbed your interest here with working with sports there when you were at Bridgewater, or maybe even when you were in high school?
Well, it's interesting. So I'm a 757 original. I'm actually from Norfolk. Yeah,
Okay.
and so I went to high school at Booker T. Washington,
Right.
so not too far from the Old Dominion campus.
Right.
And during the 70s, which is when I was in high school, and going there, I played a little baseball. I swam 1 year for Booker T. The next year, they won the Eastern District title, knocked off Maury, which was the big rivalry at that time.
Right.
So doing that, but I also did some public address announcing, did a little bit, not forensic speaking, but did some public speaking contests for scholarship competition and things like that. And so I think what happened is I went to Bridgewater. Old Dominion was one of my selections, Bridgewater and UVA, and I opted to go to Bridgewater because it was a small school. There's a much more backstory to that I won't bore you with, but went there and being well, my father was an iron worker, and it's a private school, so I needed financial aid. So my financial aid was to work in the public information office with the senior sports information director. When I mean senior, he was a college senior, not senior in terms of experience or anything beyond that. Alan Miller, he was an accounting major. Um, I had no idea there was even that type of profession, quite frankly. So I fell into it there. And I think what happened, being a small school, when they looked at my resume, I had done some writing, I had done the public speaking, played a little sports. I think they just matched that up with that position. So I was really fortunate. I ended up doing that because had I been in the cafeteria washing dishes, I might still be washing dishes somewhere today. You know? So I'll do respect to dishwashers and the people. We got to have them all to work, of course.
Right.
So anyway, so I came in to Bridgewater College as a bio general science major, and but was working there as a sports information director. When Alan graduated that spring of my freshman year, he said, "Curt, it's all yours, man. You take it." So I
Right.
took it and ran with it, and got in touch with other sports information directors at places like NC State, UNC, Virginia.
Right.
Those are schools I reached out to that responded back to me and kind of learned, just what you're doing here. And so by the time it shook out, I was really interested in staying at Bridgewater. It was not a full-time job, but the president was an economics professor. He didn't really get into sports that much. In fact, he would say something like, yeah, the Norfolk Tides beat the Rochester Red Wings 4-3 is how he would read the score. He would do that, but he knew economics. And fortunately, at that time, for me, demographics were showing that college-bound students in the mid 80s was going to be on the decline. And Bridgewater, being a small school with an enrollment of between 750 and 900, kind of fluctuated during the early 80s. If it were to go down 100 people, that was huge economically, on Bridgewater College. So I convinced him that, hey, if we present the athletic program as something that might be of interest and at least grab your attention, then maybe that can help us to keep the retention there, or actually, keep the enrollment up a little bit. He bid it. He bought in. We started to really produce a true recruiting program at that time, and I did an independent study on the subject. Switched my major to business midway through my college career, and at the end of it, I wrote that paper, and it basically was my first job. So I sold it to the president. Along with Linda Glover, who was the director of admissions at the time, and so. That was the big part of it. And then the other aspect to kind of tell you about is that when I came back home after my freshman year, hung out at Virginia Beach that whole summer, didn't work or anything. But when I got back in August, I had a message from a guy by the name of Mike Schickman. Yeah. So Hampton Roads people probably know him because he was big friends with Tony Mercurio, and local ESPN down there. So I remember I can see that note in my mind's eye right now. And Mike said, "Hey, get me this for your team. Get me that for your team." I said, "Sure." And call in voicers, previews and reviews of your football and basketball games. I said, "Sure." And that ultimately led to an internship with him. And when I finished up at Bridgewater undergraduate and had signed my contract to work for BC, I was also working part-time for WSVA radio, what is now the Harrisonburg Radio Group. And so I worked with them because I needed money. And, and the Valley League too became a part of that too, in the sense that a fellow who was a local banker, he called over to JMU and said, "Do you have anybody interested in keeping score for the Harrisonburg Turks this summer?" And Rich Murray, who later left JMU and became the SID at UVA, he said, "No, but I know of a guy named Curt Dudley down at Bridgewater. He might be interested, as he's starting the full-time gig down there." And so Earl Shirkey called me. He said, "It's $10." I said, "I'm sold. I'll be there." And that was 1983, and I've been working with that organization ever since. So that's kind of how it all got started, and then it just evolved from there. But those are kind of the way that all got seeded.
Well, that's good, and I know that we've talked offline, but then you started with the Harrisonburg Turks there in '83. Well, I started following the Valley League there, there in the early '90s as my brother Mike Ragsdale was playing at William and Mary. Spent a couple summers there, '93 and '94. To be exact, there with the Winchester Royals. And what an awesome league that the Valley League, was and still is today, just straight down 81. And then as Waynesboro, 64, Charlottesville, and, now even Culpeper. But you've definitely seen the Valley League grow to what it is today.
Oh, no doubt. When I first, I didn't know much about it. I knew there were a couple of Harrisonburg teams. There was the Harrisonburg Turks and the ACs that I think played in the county league at that time. I have to check with one of my older friends about that. But so in '83, the league was not as big. I think there were only 6 teams back at that time. Winchester, Front Royal, Newmarket, Harrisonburg, Waynesboro, and Stanton. That was it. And of course, now you expand, as you mentioned. Culpeper had its first season this past year. Covington's been in the league for a long time now. Rockridge was in and out. Still have Winchester, Front Royal. Percival had a team up at in West Virginia, Charlestown for a short period of time. And let's see, Madison County actually had a team late in the '80s as well. That might have been an expansion team. So I need to go back and brush up on my history of that. But yeah, it's been a really cool league. And what's nice about it, you mentioned your brother, and I certainly remember him playing at William and Mary because I was the baseball sports information director for the Dukes during his career. And then in '93, I moved from becoming the full-time scorekeeper for Harrisonburg. Additionally, became the league statistician. And so what happened there was, and you'll appreciate this because some of our offline conversation. So Ben Tritipo was the SID at George Mason at the time, working with Billy Brown there, of course, and he introduced us to the software that ultimately became the national software for live scorekeeping for college baseball for years. It's just now starting to maybe get away from that, but we'll see if that actually happens or not. But so they guinea pigged that software a fellow by the name of Alex Inman. He was brilliant, and they guinea pigged it with the Colonial Athletic Association and brought it on in '94. So what I was doing in '93 was starting the transition from didn't know what we were actually where it was going to end up, but was switching over from the manual statistical updating of things to the digital, using computers. Now we still were doing everything by hand. So in '93, we started, they would ship the box scores to me, or actually the score sheets to me, and we would rebuild the games in the software. And that way we had, otherwise you were tabulating everything. And so the first, from '83 until '93, we would not get updated statistics until the very end of the season, or maybe once or twice during the course of the, the 2 months or so. So '93 started to work that in. So the time your brother was playing, we were transitioning from old school, chiseling stone to actually typing it in. So, but that was a good time.
Right. And a little side note, since you bring up Billy Brown there at George Mason, and here we are at the Fall Classic, and the Valley League, Dayton Moore, who coached the Winchester Royals and had a great career as a scout with the Braves, then running the Royals. And I think now he's like a special advisor there in the Rangers front office.
Yeah, he certainly has had a fabulous career. It's been nice to follow him, bump into him every once in a while. And the Ben Tritipo that I mentioned earlier, of course, he knows those guys very well. So there's that nice connection. Tritipo, by the way, I will say this: he is one of the many. They have a handful of guys that rotate through. He's an official scorer with both the Baltimore Orioles and the Washington Nationals.
Nice.
So yeah, he does that on the side now too. So anytime I'm in the middle of the game and have an argument about how a stat should be done, I text him real quick, say, "What do you think about this?" And usually I get the answer I want. So it's pretty.
Yeah, well, that's good. And and then let's see. So you're still working here with the Harrisonburg Turks. What was your connection here with going from Bridgewater athletic department to James Madison?
Well, I think a couple of things. Remember, I mentioned that I was working part-time radio, so people knew. I mean, being on the radio is kind of personal marketing, personal branding. You're working for a station, but you're out there. People know, and of course now with all the social media connections, there's many more. I mean, think about it. People in this medium never would have had an opportunity to be in the medium, one way or another. So whether it's hobby like you are, or professionally, and so what happened was they knew of me over at James Madison. And the one thing too is here's a huge difference between Division III Bridgewater and Division I James Madison. The basketball seasons, usually the Division III teams, they take a bit of a break during the holidays, probably a longer break than do the Division I teams. Right. And so JMU would oftentimes have a handful of games between, say, December the 10th and January the 10th. And they would not have, typically you're going to augment your professional staff with a student staff. And they didn't have their students weren't there. So they needed somebody that had the background to do statistics. And so I would go in and they would shift their personnel to their needs, but I would come in and do a game or two every winter, men's or women's basketball, calling the game statistically speaking. And so it actually happened twice. In '85, there was an opening there, but I really liked what I was doing at Bridgewater and felt like I hadn't got the position where I felt comfortable with it to leave. Right. So I didn't apply at that time. Don't know that I would have gotten it that time, but I didn't. And then in January of '88, I went over to work a game. It was JMU versus Radford. And after the game, somebody came up to me. I was standing in the middle of the court at the Convocation Center, just kind of wrapping things up. And somebody came over and said, "Hey, we've got a job opening over here. You know anybody interested?"
Right.
Like, okay. And at that time, I was actually in grad school at JMU as well. So I thought, all right, 5 years at Bridgewater. This is about it. I've about done all I can there right now. And this is an opportunity. And really what got me that tipped the scale was I was going to work with the JMU baseball team under Brad Babcock, a team a franchise, a program which had just been 5 years removed from the College World Series. So I thought that's pretty cool, you know. In fact, the only other job I ever applied for had the similar background. It was the Stanford Cardinal. I once applied for a position to be the sports information director for baseball at Stanford, and they didn't give me a call, didn't say they got my resume, didn't say they got a letter, you know, so no big deal. But that was the only other job that I went after, you know, in the time that it was at JMU. So that's I just went over as a sports information director and carried a lot of the skill set I had learned at Bridgewater and on radio to that, you know, that department, sports information as it was called then, and everything else kind of evolved and was great because in a college environment I could develop and evolve these programs, and it kind of led to ultimately what I finished up as the director of broadcast services, and now I carry that title still with an emeritus status tied to it as well.
Yes, and you bring up Coach Babcock, you know, there that led JMU baseball, and you know, Whit is a graduate of JMU and Virginia Tech athletic director, and we talked offline. You know, Coach Brooks, you know, coached Lady Dukes basketball, is now down the road, you know, leading Lady Hokies. So definitely quite a few connections here between JMU athletics and Virginia Tech athletics.
No doubt. There are plenty of them down there. Everything from coaches to administrators, you know, like Whit, who was one of my student athletes as he played for his father for a year or two before Brad retired. And then, of course, and you mentioned Kenny Brooks, soccer coaches down there, athletic administrators, sports medicine, strength and conditioning. You look in every office in the athletics department at Virginia Tech, and there's a pretty good chance there's a JMU connection there. I mean, even Jeff Bourne, who has announced his retirement, Jeff really cut his teeth athletically in the business office at Virginia Tech with Dave Brain before he moved on to Georgia Tech, before he became the athletics director at JMU in 1999. So, yeah, there are a lot of connections, and my daughter's a Virginia Tech alum. So we keep an eye on the Hokies. In fact, they had you know, really great baseball season year before last, and so I went down there twice to the sub-regionals and the super regionals, and really thoroughly enjoy getting to those regionals, because that's where my Division I origin was and working with baseball. And so I miss it. And when every once in a while I get that opportunity to hit a regional site, sometimes there have been times in the past where I'd hit 2 regional sites in the same day just by driving, you know, if they were close enough, you know, which is really cool. I think you can do that. So,
yes. Yeah. So with your work there at James Madison, and, you know, thankfully Stanford didn't respond to you, because there's plenty of opportunities here in the, you know, in the state of Virginia. But, you know, you've definitely seen the growth here with JMU athletics, social media, and then moving from CAA to Sunbelt. I mean, with the football program going from FCS, which they did have success, you know, playing for 4 titles, winning 2, you know, and then going, when they went to the Sunbelt, going from FCS to FBS.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, and I've been very fortunate that that's what's happened at JMU. And I give a lot of credit to people that, quite frankly, are no longer with us anymore. If you go back historically to Dr. Ron Carrier, when he took over the university in the early 70s, really got the men's athletics program started at that time. He was monumental there. Leoto Morrison, who was the women's athletics director. And Old Dominion and JMU, I talked about this during a field hockey match. We had the Monarchs visited JMU this past Sunday. If you look at 2 universities that have had a major impact on women's college athletics, well, it's Old Dominion and James Madison. It really is. Now, there's some other programs around the country had tremendous success. I mean, you think about Tennessee, you think about Stanford, you think about Penn State, Texas. Those schools, they all have great women's athletics programs as well. But I think from maybe being bellwethers in the development of Title IX and how Title IX carried all that out, these are two universities that have a big history of that. So and that led up to really where JMU is today as well, because when Dean Ehlers, another man I want to mention here, when Dean became the athletics director, he and Dr. Carrier, Dean was kind of the on the level guy. Dr. Carrier he was one of those that he was a great politician. Let me put it that way, So Dean, he hired Dean so that Ron wouldn't cheat. How that works. At least the stories go. And I must say that I did have the pleasure for many years to sit face to face with Dr. Carrier and listen to many of his stories. And they were great, and I'm glad that I did, because I can now echo those historical aspects. But they set the tone for what JMU has become today, and I think when you look at when Linwood Rose took over as the president, Charlie King came in as the vice president for finance and administration, the guy who really handled the budgets and worked with the athletic program. Fortunately, he was a sports fan as well. And then when Jeff Bourne came on in '99, that really set the tone. But you had to do it, and JMU did it very patiently. You can tell. And JMU fans wanted it to happen sooner. I understand that. Just like a kid wants to have a bowl of ice cream now. Sometimes you have to be very patient. And right now, James Madison is reaping the rewards from that patient aspect, because you see just the national exposure that JMU is getting right now, and it came with that gradual growth, and that growth included the very strategic building up of the athletics program and building up of the facilities. And building up of the budget. So that's why JMU is successful right now. And it's interesting because it's not a huge market. This is not a big, financial market with a lot of businesses. It's very small community when it comes down to it. But James Madison University does an awful lot in the local economy. So it all kind of plays back upon itself, which is how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, and nothing like 2015. Still being FCS, but nothing like for ESPN game day and Lee Corso, coming out there. That must have been, just awesome sight to see here. Not only to have the football program, but to have the school there on a national level there in 2015.
That was a tremendous, that was great. It helped to put JMU on the map even more so. Certainly as an FCS football program, you're getting some national exposure, which is good. And if you win, you're on quite a number of Fridays or Saturdays in a row, from December up until the championship game. So there was that. But to have that on campus and the way that the fans responded, and this goes it goes back again to the overall how JMU athletics is not independent of James Madison University. There is a very good working relationship there. I think that's something that has been emphasized for a long time, because athletics didn't want to step on academic toes, certainly, right. But we also wanted to bring academics with us and say, hey, we can bring the attention to your programs. With success, and it's happening right now. Even with the no bowl debate is actually, you can't get much more exposure unless we were in a Power 5 conference. Even if we were doing the same thing right now as a group of 5, without and knowing we're going to a bowl. Now maybe you're starting to talk about the New Year's Six right now because JMU's undefeated. And that would certainly help, but I think it's gonna carry out pretty well, and we'll get some analytics on just what all this talk is doing, because we've got ways that we can look and see how many exposures, how many comments, how many mentions. I mean, and then they'll put a dollar value on that too. We'll get an idea, and it's going to be from an advertising equivalency, it is going to be gargantuan. I'm pretty sure, so that's been a case of where, you spend your time putting the pennies in the piggy bank, and ultimately that thing gets too full, and the economy starts to work on itself, which again, that's how you want it to work. So.
Right. And before we talk about, the big game on Saturday, my wife and I were ODU men's basketball season ticket holders here with living in the area. And I know with Old Dominion being in the Sun Belt, but last year when the JMU men came, I mean, it was finally, the Constant Center was finally rocking, sold out crowd. I mean, I know that VCU and George Mason, they've moved on to the Atlantic 10, but it's definitely great to see James Madison and Old Dominion back in the same conference. And I think the rivalry has moved past the ODU VCU since ODU and JMU are back in the same conference.
Yeah, I wouldn't debate that, and maybe I'll have to talk to some of my Old Dominion friends and see that many of them, which I went to Booker T. Washington High School with, just to see how they feel about it. And and I think what the biggest difference there is the football, because quite frankly, without if both these schools didn't play football, then we probably would have VCU, George Mason, Richmond, JMU, and Old Dominion, kind of going back to the old ECAC South, right? I mean, back in the way day. Yeah, but I think that has been very healthy, and I think Old Dominion fans clamored for that because, and I've heard people say it that have with certainly a lot of qualification. UTEP just didn't move the needle that much. UTSA didn't move the needle that much, and so and even though the Sun Belt is more regionally spread out, it does. I mean, there is, maybe Texas State doesn't really resonate with folks, here on the East Coast, but they're playing in a Western division and you get them every once in a while. But, when you got Marshall and Georgia State and Georgia, Georgia Southern and JMU and Old Dominion, it's become a fun league, and there are some very good programs out there in many sports, and spring sports in particular are pretty cool, pretty good. And look at the men's soccer league. My goodness, that is crazy. I mean, they're third RPI behind the Pac-12 and the ACC here recently, and they just beat up on each other. And I think men's soccer is going to be wild every year. Every year it's going to, like Kentucky just beat Marshall after Marshall was beaten at home by West Virginia after being at number one for a number of weeks. So yeah, I think it's just going to be wide open, and baseball and softball is going to be fun every year too, I think.
Right. Yes. And Saturday, I mean, just JMU football. I mean, this is the fifth time that the football team just this year is on one of the ESPN networks, sixth time on TV as NFL Network, has an agreement there with Sunbelt, Sunbelt schools. But, Saturday night, 8:00, Old Dominion taking the ride for 64 West there to 81. It should be an awesome atmosphere.
Yeah, I think so. It's one that we look forward very much to. It was homecoming already, so we had that to look forward to. But then when ESPN says, "Hey, we're going to put you on national television again, like for you to have the game at 8:00," it created another historical situation for JMU, getting again on the national exposure. First time a homecoming game is played with the lights on. It's always been an afternoon game. So there's some, and that's one of the growing pains, the adjustments of going from FCS to FBS. One of the first things we had to teach our fans was we do not know the game times, until 2 weeks before, 12 days before is when we learn what time the game is going to kick off. So people just have to blank out their calendar and know that there's going to be a home game or even a road game. And we don't know after the first 2 weeks. We usually don't know unless circumstance like JMU going to Marshall for that Thursday night game. We know that kind of early because ESPN plans that much earlier. So there are those adjustments that you have to make, but that makes it exciting too. So that it's almost to me it has a little bit of a feel of what would happen when during the FCS playoffs you would play a night game in December.
Right.
because you were on ESPN. You were playing that 7 o'clock slot or 8 o'clock slot on a Friday or Saturday night, and those were usually some of your prime games. When it came down as they were whittling down through the playoffs. So it has a little sense of that feel, plus the rivalry feel, and and this Commonwealth clash, and there's that Town Bank Royal rivalry going on there too. So that's which right now is a close one out of the gate with Old Dominion beating JMU in field hockey on Sunday. So yeah, it's got a lot at stake. I think it'll be fun. It's actually one of two homecomings. Bridgewater has a homecoming Saturday afternoon as well. So it helped me because now I get to go to that game and then go to the Old Dominion game. So I'm having a pretty good day.
Right. Yes. And with you going to high school here in the 757, me currently living in the area, I mean, just the 757 talent that has not only gone on to play JMU football, Arthur Moats, here from Portsmouth, but also other student athletes. And I know that my wife and I, were friends with Kyle McPherson's parents, so definitely came up for quite a few baseball games there when Kyle played there. And one of the reasons why I wanted to go there was when Mike played at William and Mary, they weren't playing at the or they didn't have the upgrades.
Right. We were at Long Field when Mike was playing. Yeah. Which actually at that time was one of the better stadiums in the Commonwealth at the time Mike was playing. Although Old Dominion's Bud Matheny was certainly pretty good at that time too. But yeah, Virginia's wasn't much. Even Virginia Tech's wasn't much at that particular time. So yeah. So what you came up to see the Veterans Memorial Park is where you came to visit. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it, just awesome. Things across the campus. I mean, because basketball has ended up upgrading their venue also, right?
Oh yeah. You have the Atlantic Union Bank Center, season number 4. It starts in 2 weeks, November the 6th. The men are actually at Michigan State that night. The women are at home to open up against Eastern Mennonite. So they're going to take on a little local team here. And then they play again on Wednesday of that week against Toledo. So you have the Atlantic Union Bank Center, which is in its 4th year. Unfortunately, it opened during the COVID time. It was supposed to open up. Grand opening supposed to be in 20. But I want to thank the folks over at Virginia because they were scheduled to come in and play that year, and they postponed it a year. And so the Cavaliers came in the year following that. And so appreciate Tony Bennett making that change. What a class act he was. And he said, hey, this is good for college basketball. Good. We actually beat the Cavaliers there at home that night. Nice. If you want to catch the Cavaliers, you catch them early because by January, he's got them doing what he wants them to do. And they're much tougher. So, so that was certainly great. So that venue is really off the charts. And we just this fall, what's happened is that when the Atlantic Union Bank Center was open, that freed up space at the JMU Convocation Center, which was opened up in 82, 83. And so that facility has been refurbished and is now the sole competitive home of the volleyball program. And not many programs across the country have a single venue dedicated to their competition. And then 7 other sports teams share that facility with locker rooms and training areas and their sports medicine and nutrition and psychologists and sports. Well, I said sports and strength and conditioning. So it's turned out to be a really great venue for those 8 programs.
Right. Yes. And I know that, with the growth here of college football, hotels, tailgating, so just a great atmosphere. But, even if games, for other athletics, I mean, with streaming, you don't have to be there in person here with technology to follow JMU athletics.
Right. And I mean, with the Sun Belt, of course, there comes with that the ESPN contract, which is outstanding, which is why the Dukes are getting national exposure week in and week out, which is why I'm taking Saturdays off because national exposure is coming in. Right. I do the games if it's on ESPN Plus. You know how many games I've done this year? One. So, which is, it's great though for the university. So, and for the football program, it's outstanding. And I enjoy the days that I don't have to necessarily prep and do that, although I certainly enjoy that aspect too. But yeah, we've got what we try to do at JMU is we shoot for 100%, but we feel pretty comfortable if we hit about 70 to 75% of all of our other sports. And it's not, and some of that comes with, for example, tomorrow, Thursday, we will have two events going on at the same time. Volleyball's at home against Georgia Southern, and then women's soccer is at home as well for their final home match of the year, I believe it is. And so the soccer match will be on ESPN Plus. We've only got the capability of doing one ESPN Plus at a time at this particular point. But I'll go over to volleyball and we'll do on the Varsity Network app. So I'll do basically a radio broadcast of volleyball for both Thursday and Friday. Well, my colleague Corey Spector will manage the play-by-play along with Dave Lombardo as the color analyst. And then I'll move over and do the field hockey game against Georgetown on ESPN Plus as well on Sunday. So that just kind of gives you an example. Then the next Saturday, we're going to have swimming and diving on ESPN Plus, and the numbers are the exposure for that alone has been anywhere from 6 to 10 times what it was, under the old way that we were doing it. So, and quite frankly, too, is that we got kind of caught with many of the votes that went on as far as internet live productions and broadcasting. JMU was usually on the short end of the voting in the Colonial because JMU was so far advanced, quite frankly, than all the other schools in what they were doing. So with the exception of one or two, I don't want to say that disparagingly, but so JMU basically outgrew the Colonial, and that was one of the ways that it outgrew. And because we were doing free video services and selling advertising for it, and we weren't paying all of our costs, but we were cutting into it quite deeply before the Colonial signed a contract with Flow Sports, and that I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay,
right.
It wasn't very well received, but anyway.
Right. Yeah. Well, Curt, I certainly appreciate your time. Sorry we went over, but
no problem.
Definitely a lot to talk about here, and I know that Saturday be a great atmosphere, and I know that my wife and I will be tuned in there to ESPNU.
Yeah, it should be a good one. Duke's 7-0, and Old Dominion beating App State this past week puts a little bit more spice on this one as well, because that was a tremendous win. They're coming in with some momentum, and you figure that the Monarchs remember the way things played out last year, and they've got new life. They feel like they've got a chance to win the East, and it is wide open. Just one loss in conference play, so they can kind of hold their own destiny here with what they do. And this weekend would be big with that for the Monarchs as well.
Yes, well, hey, appreciate your time. And if my wife and we come out there for a basketball game or maybe even a baseball game, hope to meet you in person. But thanks again for coming on and sharing your story.
Yep. If you come to Veterans Memorial, you come to the United Bank Center. I'm pretty easy to find in those venues. So yeah, make sure that you seek me out, even if I'm running at the time, because sometimes we're hustling from one spot to the other. But yeah, would love to have you up here, and good to see you. And thank you for your time today. I appreciate it very much. So it's been fun.
Sure, you're welcome. So JMU fans, that was Curt Dudley with us today. So thanks again as get ready here for homecoming weekend, and JMU football host Old Dominion there at 8:00 on ESPNU. So have a good rest of the week there, Curt.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You too.